She is a woman of many paths. She's an author, she's a model, she's a political activist, she's a top chef. And she's here in India for a multi-city book tour to promote her memoirs and also her latest book on spices. It is my pleasure to welcome Padma Lakshmi. Padma, you still carry a lot of India with you. I sense that even when I meet you in New York. Your Madras memories are very much a part of you. But you're American now. So what is Madras for you now and what is India for you now?
I mean, I think I'm still very tied to Madras and to India because the time I spent in India and specifically in Madras is very idealistic. Whether it was 3 months every year from the time I was in KG to 12th grade or when I've come back as an adult, have been for me a place of safety, a place of real comfort. I return psychologically to that carefree, childlike state.
Love, Loss and What We Eat, your very, very honest book. I always say this every time we meet, that I'm really struck by how honest it is. Memory and food are very intertwined, and you know this, that one of my favorite passages in this book is you growing up with your grandparents in Chennai and being given that 2 rupee note to go and buy ice cream, vanilla ice cream, with that wooden spoon attached to the back of it. And that 2 rupees from your grandfather, it's obviously a memory that you carry very dear with you. It goes with you wherever you go. So talk a little bit about these connections between food and memory for you.
I think we all have them, whether we're conscious of them or not, or where emotional memory is registered in our brain is in very close physical proximity to where our sense of smell, which is 75% of taste, is located in the amygdala. That is why for most people, they can have a bite of a sandwich or apple pie or chaat, and immediately they're taken back to that market in Moti Bagh or Thanksgiving with their grandparents or whatever. Because I have an interest in food that's very keen, that was happening to me tenfold. And I approach life from the point of view of food. It is my way in to my experience of the world. I think food is incredibly important and symbolic. As a culture, everything we do, we commemorate with food, whether it's a birth or a marriage or a death. So food is much more emotional and symbolic than just mere physical sustenance.
So what is the food you think of when you think of India?
My grandmother's rasam and rice. When I have a cold, especially, I think of khichdi. And in fact, Sundays are khichdi night, even in my apartment in New York that I share with my daughter. I also love chaat. I'm an avid consumer of pani puri and bel puri and
the assumption is that people who model don't eat, and that clearly doesn't apply, right?
It is. The people who model are freaks of nature, and so they have these, Olympic metabolisms.
So your book, the memoir, what made you take the decision to actually lay bare so much of your personal life? And many people in India have followed your marriage and then its end to another person who has roots in India, Salma Rushdie. You write in the book that it was like a beautiful meal that gave you mood poisoning, which is a very clever sentence, but it doesn't begin to capture the entire gamut of pain and conflict and anxiety and turmoil. How difficult was it to actually put pen to paper about something so intimate and so personal?
It was incredibly difficult, but for so long I wanted to be taken seriously for my intellect, not just for my modeling or how I looked. And I think...
And did you find that people would stereotype you before they knew you?
Yes, absolutely. And
what would they think about you?
Well, I think they thought that, I was just a pretty face who was probably very ambitious, but I used my looks to get where I was, and they were right. My profession is a model, so I did make money from my physical appearance, but it ended there. And I think a lot of people were very cynical about why I've dated the people I have, of course, Salman and thereafter, and that is such a superficial view. Any smart person knows that if you want to be with someone rich, you don't go after a writer. First of all, no matter who he is, okay?
But because?
Writers don't most writers don't make that much money.
Yes.
So the idea that I'm sort of this, ambitious woman using my feminine wiles to date this very powerful man is kind of, to me, a bit simple-minded and ignorant.
And also sexist.
Very sexist. The reason that I was attracted to Salman was because he was very successful, but because I admired him, because he had all, and has, all of the attributes that I wanted a little bit to have myself. And that's because I was raised by intellectuals, and I was raised by my grandfather who, was probably, other than Salman, the most well-read person I've ever met.
But when you do write about the fights you had with Salman, it dovetails somewhere into your larger experience with endometriosis, and your own actually lack of understanding of it at first. And you do talk about sexual intimacy becoming a point of friction between you and Salma Rushdie. And you're also feeling guilted out in some ways, as women tend to do. And it is an unflattering portrait of him in terms of how he responded, right? How do you look back at those moments, A, and B, was it really difficult to write all of that for the entire world to read, and why did you do it?
Endometriosis is something I've suffered with since I was 13. So, most of my adult life, and certainly since puberty. I didn't know I had it until I was 36. And toward the end of my marriage was when I finally got the proper treatment. While I know I write about some painful things which maybe appear unflattering to Salman, I hope that I've written a fair portrait. I hope what comes through from that book is that these were two people who really loved each other. And for whatever reason, they lacked empathy for each other. That Salman could not understand what was happening to me hormonally and biologically, and that I myself, first and foremost, did not understand it at all. So I couldn't explain in my own head why here was this man that I loved, that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, that I admired and looked up to and wanted to make happy, genuinely wanted to please. And yet every fiber of my body just didn't feel like it. And now that I got my diagnosis and I know why, my doctor explained to me that there would be no gram of my body that would want to be touched when there was so much amiss with my reproductive system. The body itself rejects anything that it observes as a threat. And millions of women who've suffered from endometriosis will tell you the same thing. I can't tell you in retrospect what would have or should have happened, but I do wish that I and Salman had understood it a lot earlier. It was very painful for me. Even if I chose to leave, I didn't do it lightly, and I felt like it was a death. It was the death of a marriage. I regret any pain I've caused Salman, but I also think he had his part in it. I don't think a marriage fails just because of one person.
How, when you were writing it, did you feel the need to hold back some stuff?
I held back a lot of things.
You did?
Yeah, I mean, the book is so
because it is still searingly honest and very personal.
Yes. It's not an autobiography. So from a creative point of view as an artist, I wanted it to have a narrative structure. So there were a lot of things that happened, not with Salman and I, but just in general in my life, that were much worse than whatever I put in the book, if you can believe that. But there was no place to put that in the book, because then I would have to explain it, then we would go off into this other tangent. And I wanted, whether you cared about me or my life or even knew who I was, I wanted that if by chance someone got the book in their hands and they started to read it, that they would just enjoy it as a piece of literature. That it was a well-written book.
So I know it's a lot out there.
Yeah.
For example, you've always been very open about the fact that after your relationship with Salman, ends, there's also this other dimension of your personal life where you have two simultaneous relationships with two men. You have a child, Krishna.
Yeah.
And at one point you don't know who the father is. Yeah. All of that plays out in the public domain. You then discover which one of the men is the father. You're conflicted, you're tormented. It's confusing.
And it's embarrassing and humiliating and very public and splashed all over newspapers from New York to London to Mumbai. And Australia, you know.
And is that suffocating?
It was mortifying. I felt like running and hiding because I can be as liberal as I want, but the truth is that most of my family still lives in India. And so they're not, you know, they're
like, what did your grandmother say?
My grandmother, I never talked to her about it. She
never asked you either?
She never kept quiet. She just kept saying, please tell her I hope she's okay. Like, we would talk about everything else. Once I was pregnant, like, that was her focus.
You know, but Padma, beyond the sort of gossip quotient, which will follow you where you go and you're used to that, but I want to ask you a question as a feminist, and this interests me and it matters to me. And that is that if you had lived the exact same life as a man, with two simultaneous relationships, with a child, with the accompanying drama, the words that would have been used to describe your narrative would have been very, very different.
Oh yes, I would have been patted on the back because I wasn't cheating on anybody. I wasn't married. I wasn't even in a committed relationship. I was playing the field. I'm an adult woman. I can make those choices, right?
But when women play the field, they're judged.
They're
totally
called
different
harlots.
way.
Yeah, I mean, even in this day and age, they're called all sorts of names. If I was a man, I would be called a playboy, a lady killer. I would have been patted on the back.
And so when people were saying like crap about you, how did you deal with it?
Because I had been raised always to not embarrass yourself, to be reserved as an Indian woman, you know, the Asian aesthetic of like, you don't want to make waves, and you are always concerned about what will people think. And I spent my life worrying about what people would think, Barkha. And finally, when I started to have some measure of success by my own hand, and I, was independent, and I was making a good living, and I had achieved whatever I had achieved by myself. Just because you're in the paper as somebody's wife doesn't mean anyone's going to give you a job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it had no bearing on anything.
So when this life of yours was being deconstructed, did you feel, you said you were mortified and embarrassed, but did that at some point turn into anger? Did that at some point turn into, you guys don't have the right to judge me, you guys don't have the right to make an opinion of me?
That's right. And the moment at which I took the power back was when I put my words on the page. It made me mad that that's all they wanted to talk about, that they didn't want to talk about my Emmy Award with my show. I'm not some mega superstar, but the accomplishments that I have are my own, and I'm very proud of them. Whether they're the women's health charity, or my show, or my writing, all of those things are mine, and mine alone, because I've worked hard for them. And that people were so focused to this day about like, who I was sleeping with or not sleeping with, to me is infantile and uninteresting. But of course it hurts me, right? So the only way that I knew how to take my life back was to say, yeah, so it happened.
Let's look at language, right? So if you were male and this was your life, what is the word you think would have been used for you?
Playboy.
And what is the worst thing you heard said for you as a woman?
Oh, that she just sleeps around, and that's what's
so that's the point, right?
Sure.
It's the misogyny and the double standard of it all.
Incredible misogyny. I mean, when I wrote my book, whether it was conscious or not, I think it is who I am. I am a feminist and I'm an immigrant. So those threads and those storylines and that point of view is underlined and illustrated again and again and again, whether I'm 4 years old or 17 years old or 25 years old or 37 when I divorced. That undercurrent and those themes are there because they are central to my life. I am a brown woman living in a white man's world. I cannot escape the fact that I'm a woman and that I'm an immigrant who's brown. So that colors my life whether I want to or whether I wanted to or not. I had no idea when I was writing the book how relevant my very small story of one person, subjective, would have greater context in what's going on in the United States today.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah.
That you're a woman and you're an immigrant. And as an immigrant today, you're looking at the entire debate around the Muslim ban.
I saw where there was a female candidate who was vilified for the actions of her husband. And I saw our president be elected in spite of being on film and on taped audio saying that he forced himself on women and that he could get away with it because he was famous. I saw a man being elected to our highest office in spite of the fact that 17 different women have come out and in court papers filed complaints about him sexually harassing them and assaulting them. So it's not just me that's experiencing this. It is every woman who lives in the United States. And it is worse if you are a brown woman, and it is even worse if you are a black woman. Because of this fact.
You were marching at the Women's March with your daughter.
Yes.
I met you in New York when you were, in fact, campaigning for Hillary. You, at one point, had called Donald Trump a racist buffoon.
Yeah.
He was not president then. He is president now. What would you call him now?
I would still call him a racist buffoon. I would just add the word dangerous.
Is there enough evidence now that liberals globally are actually being pushed to the wall?
I hope so. I hope so.
Why do you hope so? Why do you want liberals to fail? And liberals are failing.
I don't want them to fail. I want them to acknowledge
that
failure.
Yes.
And I want them to, myself included. The first thing that I thought after the election was, God, why didn't I do more?
But there is a problem of a liberal echo chamber, and we face it here in India too, where we as liberals, and I count myself as one, can't necessarily influence the mass. And if you can't influence the mass, if you do not have a language or an idiom to talk to them in, what's the point? You're just you're preaching to the converted.
Well, I think you used a very important word. I think you're preaching. Republicans are much more savvy at gathering, those common people, and getting them in whatever way they can to be on their side, with very short-term results. Like this whole, we, meaning liberals in America or wherever, we need to understand that when you are not able to put food on your table for your child, you are not concerned with ideology. You are concerned with your wallet today. And so sometimes the short-term help is more immediate and evokes a more visceral response.
Because there are a lot of people who hold up these placards, not my president.
Yeah.
Do you accept Donald Trump as your president?
I accept that he's holding the office of the United States presidency for the next 4 years.
So that answer gives away a lot of what you think. In other words, you
I believe in the democratic process.
Yes.
I believe that we voted him, and so we have to live with what we've decided as a collective. I believe, though, that he is occupying the presidency for 4 years. He's not a king or a dictator, and we have every right to challenge every one of his decisions. This choice will have an impact on my 6-year-old's life when she's 26. He will vote on her right to her own choices about her body. He will vote on marriage equality if it ever comes up again. He will influence so much of daily life in America for the next 20, 30, 40 years, and also develop and shape precedent, legal precedent that will live beyond him.
You're actually saying abortion could be revisited?
Absolutely, it is being revisited. If you go to Texas, find out how hard it is to get a safe time-sensitive abortion. Obviously, listen, they call it pro-choice. I had the opposite problem. I was told I couldn't have children. But if a woman arrives to the point where she has to have an abortion, I guarantee you it is because she has very little choice.
Yeah. So in the end, Padma, let me ask you, a lot of people thought Donald Trump was all theater in the campaign and the process of being president would in fact center him and moderate him. How would you describe the time he has spent in his presidency thus far, and how would you describe your life as an American citizen today in relation to that presidency?
My life and my daily mentality has completely changed. I never was a political animal until this happened. And I just realized that I cannot afford to sit by and just shake my head and say, well, I don't agree with that, but it's too bad about our...
So what do you plan to do?
I plan to do everything I can. I plan to give as much money as I can to the causes I believe in, like Emily's List. I plan to go back. I plan to march on April 22nd again in Washington, D.C., which is Earth Day, because this whole thing, it's not just right to choose in immigrants, it's climate change. You know, this man is not willing to acknowledge basic science. I mean, are we in the dark ages? Like, what's going to be next? Is he just going to deny evolution and be a creationist? I mean, that's what's scary to me about Trump. He does not have any limits. You and I, in as much as I know you, probably have a line that we will not cross.
Yeah.
There is no red line with this man.
So describe him in one line. What strikes you about him the most? What worries you? You use the word dangerous.
I would say a lack of decency and conscience.
Well, Padma Lakshmi, you are opinionated.
Yes.
And that is good. And if you have a sense of just how opinionated she is, trust me, you will get to know her better if you actually pick up her book, Love, Loss and What We Ate. There's also another book out, the Encyclopedia of Spices and Herbs, because the food, food is also political. And
it's very political,
isn't it?
And I've always wanted a book like this. I've always loved spices from those early days in my granny's kitchen, and I've been spending my years anyway explaining spices to Westerners. But, and as my travels took me everywhere as a model, I've had the benefit of getting to know the world's spices that are not in India. And so all that information that had nowhere to go is now in this reference book.
Looking forward to reading that book as well.
Thank you for having me. Nice to see you, Barkha.
Thank you.